Putin's Crimea is over. It was nice while it lasted, right, Vladimir? After you illegally annexed the Crimean peninsula, snatching it away from Ukraine in the process, you thought you were set. You had your little crown jewel and, in your mind, had reinforced your spurious claim to Ukraine. But after a lengthy war that was supposed to be a quick invasion, it's all come crashing down. Crimea isn't the crown jewel anymore. Ukraine is cutting off the entire peninsula, and it's gearing up to purge Russia from Crimea forever. The strategy is simple: isolate, make useless, and then destroy. Middle-range strikes are the key to everything, and we're going to explain how and why Ukraine is doing what it's doing in Crimea. Let's start with why. On May 27th, Ukraine's Ministry of Defense announced that it was officially launching its logistics lockdown program. Around $113 million is going to be dedicated to that program, with the money being funneled, at least in the first phase, directly to units that are carrying out middle-range strikes against Russian logistics all over Ukraine. In Crimea, alarm bells would have been ringing in the offices of the puppet government that Putin has set up on the peninsula. Though late May made Ukraine's intent clear, those officials knew that Crimea and the surrounding territories had been experiencing expanding strikes against everything from logistics to military targets inside Crimea. For them, logistics lockdown wasn't a new problem. It was the continuation and expansion of a campaign that was already causing major issues. The idea behind logistics lockdown is relatively simple. Wherever Russia channels its trucks and tankers is where Ukraine will hit, and those strikes will last all through summer and beyond. This is about initiative for Ukraine. As its drones crash down in Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, frontline troops in those regions all feel the pain of lost supplies and inadequate reserves. But nowhere feels what's happening more than Crimea, which relies on logistical arteries running all through occupied Ukraine to remain supplied and continue to function as a viable military threat against Ukraine. Isolating Crimea is Ukraine's ultimate goal. By doing that, Ukraine makes the entire peninsula useless to Putin and his invasion ambitions. For this isolation to happen, Ukraine has to be smart with its strikes. Sending drones into regions where Russia has amassed air defenses is a recipe for most of those drones being destroyed in the air. Ukraine doesn't want that. It needs as high a success rate as possible to make the logistics lockdown program work. What we've been seeing over the past few weeks is Ukraine's drones actively avoiding the densest Russian air defenses, which are set up on the front lines, and instead striking deep behind those defenses. Instead, Ukraine's drones are on the hunt for military convoys and fuel trucks of all types, whether they're traveling to or from Crimea. That means nearly all of occupied Ukraine is fair game for Ukraine's strikes, given Crimea's status as a logistical node through which Russia channels troops and supplies from the mainland to Ukraine. You're starting to see a little of the how come into play here when it comes to isolating Crimea. But Ukraine is under no illusions about what all of this would mean for its summer campaign. Cutting the peninsula off from the rest of occupied Ukraine is a massive undertaking. Russia has been taking advantage of that fact from the very beginning of its invasion. Crimea has been and still is a launchpad for Russia's offensive operations due to its role as a logistical node. It's home to military airfields, ammunition storage facilities, launch pads for missiles and drones, and entire arsenals that are stocked up and fed into occupied Ukraine. From Crimea, Russia is able to deploy submarines and warships. At least it was. Ukraine's campaign against Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which has seen a third of that fleet get destroyed, and the rest leave its main base in Sevastopol, has put a dent into that. But what we're seeing is reason after reason why Ukraine needs to isolate Crimea. It's too valuable to ignore from a strategic standpoint, and Putin's military buildup on the peninsula stands as a symbol of the dominance over Ukraine that Russia's leader wants to convince the world that he holds. Massive though the undertaking may be, it was also needed. Crimea has been key to Putin's plans from the moment he invaded. In the months prior to February 2022, Russia amassed troops and weapons on the peninsula. It's those soldiers that were able to seize large parts of southern Ukraine within the first few days of the so-called special military operation, setting the stage for the grinding and brutal war that has followed. Even before that, the peninsula was being used as a symbol of Russian strength. Ukrainer reports that 2019 saw Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs reveal that Russia had amassed 12 multiple-launch rocket systems, 40 tanks, 62 helicopters, 122 combat aircraft, 162 heavy artillery units, and 583 armored vehicles in Crimea. The build-up happened over years, and it established Crimea as key to everything that Russia is doing now. So isolation of the peninsula isn't a nice-to-have for Ukraine. It's about snatching away the key to Russia's entire war strategy. You've heard enough about the why by this point. With the logistics lockdown program already in place, you'll also have an inkling about the how. Let's dig deeper. The emergence of a new generation of middle strike drones has changed everything about how Ukraine approaches Crimea. These drones are capable of engaging Russian targets at operational depth, which usually falls somewhere between 20 and 200 kilometers behind the front lines. This is where Russian logistics are found, along with command posts, troop gatherings, scattered air defenses, and supply stations. It's from this region that everything that happens on the front is organized, and it's by striking the logistical arteries in this range that Ukraine is able to disrupt frontline operations and isolate Crimea all at once. For 3 consecutive months up to May, we've seen Ukraine lean more heavily into its middle strike strategy. In May, Ukraine carried out about 50% more strikes against mid-range targets than it did in April, and that increase came on the back of Ukraine having already doubled its mid-range strikes between March and April, and quadrupled them when comparing April's numbers to February. Ukraine keeps on building. By the end of June, it's looking likely that we'll be reporting on another increase. The main target of these strikes is what we've already mentioned: anything that moves on the roads that Russia uses to shuttle supplies to and from Crimea. That means fuel tankers, supply trucks, and military convoys carrying troops. It's all on the docket for Ukraine as it looks to turn the roads that Russia uses for supporting Crimea into literal hellscapes of burned-out vehicles. And now, anywhere you look on these roads, you see the impact of Ukraine's strikes. The R280 highway, which links Rostov-on-Don in Russia to the southern Ukrainian regions of Mariupol and Melitopol, along with Crimea, has become a highway to hell for any Russian vehicles that attempt to travel across it. That road is vital to keeping occupied Crimea alive. It's become the main route used by Russia into the peninsula ever since multiple Ukrainian strikes against the Kerch Bridge linking Russia to Crimea revealed that route to be far too exposed. The Guardian reports that Ukraine's 412th Nemesis Brigade has been a frontrunner in turning that stretch of road into a hellscape, as it's taken out dozens of trucks and tankers along the R280 since May. Of course, cutting off one road isn't enough to isolate Crimea. What happened after the R280 was made incredibly dangerous caught Russia completely off guard. With its middle strike drones having established dominance over the R280, Ukraine went on to hunt elsewhere. Logistical nodes in the Kherson region, which also link occupied Ukraine to Crimea, became the next target. In early June, the Chonar Bridge in Kherson was hit repeatedly, forcing Russia to divert traffic and erect makeshift pontoon crossings that can't handle the sheer volume of traffic needed to keep supplies flowing in and out of Crimea. On June 13th, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine had also hit the Henichesk Bridge, taking out another logistical artery for Crimea, along with the Armyansk Bridge, through which Russia had tried to divert traffic that could no longer take the Chonar Bridge. And to add to the pain, Ukraine also hit a railway in Kherson on the same day, demonstrating to Russia that it can't even rely on the rails to keep supplies flowing into Crimea. What we're seeing here is genius by Ukraine. First, it severed the jugular by making the R280 one of the riskiest roads to travel in all of occupied Crimea. That road is still a target, and will remain so for as long as Russia uses it. With the jugular spilling out blood in the form of destroyed vehicles and burning fuel, the Ukrainian knife heads to every other vein and artery that keep the Crimean head alive. One by one, middle strike drones are cutting those veins and arteries, and that leaves Crimea decapitated and isolated. The numbers are telling the story of Ukraine's campaign, and there's more that Ukraine is doing to isolate Crimea. But before we get into all of that, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, make sure to hit subscribe so you see more of our videos. Let's come back to the R280 for a moment. The Kyiv Post reveals that satellite imagery shows the outcome of Ukraine's campaign against the road. There are now more than 300 new Russian truck hulls scattered along the highway, all burned out or utterly demolished by Ukrainian drone strikes during the first half of June alone. There were many more besides that, which Ukraine hit in May, and from June 7th to 13th, Ukraine's Special Operations Forces linked up with the 475th Code 9.2 and 1st Da Vinci units to carry out more than 100 strikes and sorties against the land corridor bottlenecks that lie in the north of Crimea, the outlet says. New behemoth drones are being joined by old favorites, including the Liability and FP1, to do the damage. There is even word of a top-secret drone named the Morrigan that is destroying air defense systems and support targets in and around Crimea to clear a path for Ukraine's other drones. What Ukraine is doing here is making the roads in and out of Crimea impassable. And when trucks can't drive along those roads, Russia starts running out of options to keep the peninsula supplied. Elsewhere, we're also seeing Ukrainian maritime drones continue the naval campaign that has already seen Ukraine turn the Black Sea into a non-factor for Russia, despite the fact that Ukraine barely has a navy to call its own. United 24 media reports that Ukraine's arsenal of naval drones is preventing the free passage of vessels around Crimea, which amounts to another supply line being cut off. Those drones are more dangerous than they were even when they were devastating the Black Sea fleet. Now they've become full-fledged platforms, the outlet says. Some are used to carry out direct kamikaze strikes while loaded with hundreds of kilograms of explosives. Others are seaborne launch pads for Ukraine's aerial drones, which can launch from the maritime drones to attack aerial targets and conduct strikes against ships. Ukraine's naval focus has also expanded to the Sea of Azov, which links directly to Crimea's eastern coast. On June 5th, the BBC reported that Ukraine had confirmed strikes against 5 ships in the Sea of Azov and the coastal waters around the occupied territories. All of these ships were involved in stealing Ukrainian grain, along with transferring fuel and military cargo, Ukraine claims. So it's clear that the logistics lockdown program doesn't just focus on roads. The food, fuel, and supplies that are sailing into Crimea are also being taken out. If Putin is laboring under the false hope that Ukraine might slow down and that Crimea still has a chance of not being completely isolated, then he has to let go of that hope quickly. Ukraine isn't going to slow down, it's just getting started. Let's look at the Crimean Peninsula, Ukrainian Navy spokesperson Dmytro Pletenchuk said during a June 14th interview with Ukraine's Freedom TV station. It's surrounded by water on 3 sides, and accordingly, the history of previous wars fought on this territory should suggest to those who occupied it that they all ended up roughly the same way, and always not very well with retreat, Pletenchuk warns. And that's the entire point. By isolating Crimea both by land and sea, Ukraine makes maintaining the peninsula untenable. Putin himself said in March that Russia has spent around $15.5 billion on Crimea since occupying the peninsula, and that's starting to look like a lot of money that has been poured down the drain. Spending even more, which is desperately needed as Ukraine whittles away at Crimea, is a tough call for Putin to make. He'll have to make it if he wants to hold on to the peninsula, but all that will end up meaning is more money wasted on Crimea when Russia is already dealing with a looming recession and war spending that the new voice of Ukraine says is so high that it alone could exceed Russia's entire 2026 budget by $28 billion. Pletenchuk says that hard work carried out over months is starting to pay off for Ukraine. What we're seeing now isn't the result of a single day of work. It's a systematic effort that's been underway for a long time, and we can actually say we're seeing the fruits of that work now, he told Freedom. Now, Crimea isn't the symbol of Russian dominance that Putin held it up to be for so long. It certainly isn't the fulcrum on which the lever of the Russian war pivots. Crimea has been turned into an isolated peninsula surrounded by war. And it's the Russian people, both in Crimea and fighting on the front lines, that are feeling the pain. The most obvious impact of Ukraine's efforts to isolate Crimea is seen in the rampant fuel shortages that have engulfed the peninsula. By early June, puppet authorities in Crimea had already enforced fuel restrictions. Ration coupons were issued and officials were stationed at gas stations to ensure that nobody attempted to take more than their already meager share. Fuel was being sold at a limit of 20 to 30 litres per person, and that would come with the caveat that all civilian vehicles come second to Russian military vehicles and public utilities such as police cars and ambulances. The rationing hasn't worked. By June 12th, The Independent was reporting that gas stations in Crimea have been running out of fuel, resulting in massive queues and the worst fuel crisis the peninsula has experienced since Russia illegally occupied the territory. Compounding the problem is a looming food shortage. RBC Ukraine reports that empty shelves at supermarkets are becoming a common sight. Basics such as cereals, sugar, flour, and pasta are in very short supply, and the combination of Ukraine's logistical strikes and Russia's maintaining a heavy military presence in Crimea is only making the situation worse. None of this is accidental. Ukraine is starving Crimea of fuel and food. In addition to isolating Crimea as a strategic asset, Ukraine is ensuring that the Russian occupiers living on the peninsula know that the reason they're dealing with these issues is Putin and his invasion. Militarily, Crimea is now less useful to Russia than it has been since the illegal annexation in 2014. What was supposed to be one of Russia's greatest assets, and proved to be so during the early months and years of Putin's invasion, is now a major source of weakness. Frontline soldiers in the occupied territories who were relying on supplies and support to arrive from Crimea are now being forced into assaults before anything arrives to help them. The result is inevitable: weaker attacks and more deaths on the front. We're seeing this most directly in Kherson and Zaporizhia, United 24 media reports, as Crimea has long served as a launchpad for assaults in those regions. Now pressure is being relieved on Ukraine's defenses, and openings are appearing across the front. Ukraine has already been engaged in a targeted counterattacking strategy in 2026 that Reuters reports has seen it reclaim over 600 square kilometers of territory from Russia by June 8th. More counters may follow as Crimea becomes less of a factor, which in turn brings Ukrainian forces closer to the peninsula and enables even more attacks against Crimean logistics. One feeds into the other, and Russia starves. Speaking of launch pads, Ukraine is also making it far riskier for Russia to use Crimea as a launching point for the missiles and drones that it's firing into Ukraine. Crimea isn't useless in this regard, yet. A Russian attack against Ukraine on the night of June 14th into 15th proved that, as Russia was able to launch 6 3M-22 Zircon anti-ship missiles from the peninsula, along with a portion of the 611 strike drones sent into Ukraine during the attack. But with air defense systems being taken down and resources being poured into trying to prevent Ukraine's logistical strikes, it's becoming riskier for Russia to conduct launches from Crimean territory. Every missile and drone base is now a target. And with its logistics being cut off, Russia also has a harder time resupplying those bases and carrying out repairs following Ukraine's strikes. Bit by bit, Putin's hold on Crimea is being loosened. Pletenchuk explains, stating, "At some point a critical mass of defeats accumulates, ultimately leading to the collapse of the system itself." In other words, Crimea is being transformed from an asset into a severe liability. Money poured into the peninsula is being wasted. Supplies moving to and from Crimea become targets, which amounts to yet more money being wasted, as pain is brought to the most important occupied territory that Russia holds. And all the while, the social pressure builds on Putin and his cronies. Crimea's puppet regime is meant to be crowing about the latest Russian victories. Instead, it's being forced to admit that Ukraine is launching successful strikes almost every day, and there can be no ignoring the fires or the constant flow of emergency services to the sites that Ukraine strikes in Crimea and the surrounding territories. As for Ukraine, it will keep on doing what it's doing. Though a ground invasion to retake Crimea seems unlikely, isolating the peninsula makes it useless to Russia. That could force Putin to the negotiating table, and it gives Ukraine valuable leverage in peace discussions. If Putin refuses, then he loses Crimea. Liberation will not come from the march of Ukrainian soldiers, but by the withdrawal of Russia from a peninsula that is quickly becoming a lethal place to live. It's all thanks to Ukraine's strategy. And if you want to get a taste of what Ukraine has been doing against Russia and Crimea, then we have the perfect video for you. Do you remember the Armyansk crossing that we mentioned earlier? Ukraine is proving why it's such a bad idea for Russia to use that crossing to keep traffic flowing into Crimea. A fleet of Russian vehicles drove onto that bridge. 2 minutes later, they were gone. You can find out what happened if you watch our video, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the Military Show to catch more of our analysis of Ukraine's Crimea campaign. And thank you as always for watching.